to the two other panelists and also to those in the room who might be working at big companies. What more do you want to see?
Okay, so I would love to see investment in capacity building prioritized, because as Benjamin Franklin once said, an investment in knowledge pays the best interest, right? So I'm happy to hear that there's already an existing initiative in terms of financial behavior. We need to make this concept of climate finance, sustainable finance, more mainstream for young people. And not just that, because I always like to say this in terms of the fact that climate finance is one aspect, but having the right skill set to ensure that this financial investment into your initiative or solution stands the test of time is so important for sustainable solutions, right? That can be passed from one generation to the other. So young people need to, while we call out for funding from loss and damage to climate finance in general, we also need to upskill at scale, right, young people from knowledge transfer to technology transfer, and even the experiential training they need to get their hands on. And also when it comes to intergenerational collaboration, right, the older generation has a lot of knowledge that needs to be harnessed by young people. We don't want, we can learn from your mistakes, we can learn from your successes, and we can replicate principles that have been proven over time. So we want to harness that intergenerational collaboration and maximize it in a way that finance can now really mean tangible climate solutions.
It's a really, really interesting point.
An enormous generation of young people in Africa, and that is an incredible economic opportunity for the continent, the skills and energy that you can bring, but you also face a lot of challenges, not least around climate change. So what's top of mind for you at the moment? What are your hopes for the future about the role that you and your generation can play in green growth, sustainable development, and what are your concerns?
Okay, good morning everyone. So lovely to see your faces. My name is Shay, and I would say what is top of mind for me is the gap. The fact that we need to constantly pause to understand the gaps, right? Because by pausing to understand the gaps, we can then see those that are most affected and those that need most support. So then the next thing would then be planning for the transition through green skills development, right? So how are we providing young people with the resources and access they need to begin to upskill for the future, right? And also, how can we amplify the stories of those most affected by the climate injustice in Africa, for instance, through storytelling? And not just amplifying their stories, giving them the agency, giving them that platform to be seen through their indigenous solutions, because most of these people in these communities already have existing solutions, right? They just need to be supported further. So I would say what is top of mind for me is understanding the gap, and understanding the gap comes by listening to the most affected people.
Thank you so much, Shay. So Stephen, because it seems to me that since I started seriously looking at this space maybe 6 or so years ago, it's rocketed up the agenda in terms of news and the public conversation, the political conversation, the business conversation. And if you think about why that is, the factors behind it, a lot of people think it is due to the youth climate movement, the Fridays for Future movement and so many others all over the world. It's quite difficult for people who are resistant to the energy transition, it's quite difficult to just dismiss young people who are marching or protesting or calling for action around their future. But I think there's also potentially a risk of people like me in the media sort of romanticizing the younger generation and making them out to be this monolithic group of climate warriors. I mean, the US comedian Bill Maher was saying, look, Kylie Jenner has 10 times more Instagram followers than Greta Thunberg. This isn't the Greta generation, this is the Kylie Jenner generation. So, you have that debate going on, but I'm really interested in your perspective of what impact you think the youth climate movement is having and how it's developing. Because another thing that some people say about the youth climate movement is that it's been disproportionately the voices of young white people in the global north, notably in Europe, and that it may not always be properly reflecting the voices of people, young people in developing countries. So what's your take of how the youth climate movement is developing and what impact do you think it's having?
So I think my generation has the power of imagination, right? And so what we see now starts from the mind, and we have this capacity in terms of being so inspired, being so energized to translate our ideas at speed from our mind to reality. So we have a very imaginative spirit in terms of being audacious, ambitious of a better world. I'm so excited to see the topics that are at like the main topics of this conference, because I remember when I came to COP26 2 years ago, firstly, it was so hard to see groups of young people on the lobbies. Like I felt so out of place being a young person. I was 20 at that time, I'm 22 now, and I can see so much difference. Young people are more involved. However, the thing is that a lot of focus and spotlight is being put on young people in terms of, yes, we are the future, yes, we are connecting the dots, but I think one thing that I have often realized is access, right? Access to key decision makers remain a huge bottleneck we experience, that's one. And two, as you said, having that balance between the developed countries and developing countries. And so one of the things I recently started to address that gap is storytelling. So the truth is that a lot of, when it comes to climate change, from the pictures you see online, just search your phone climate change, you see probably a picture from the West, the global North, developed countries. You hardly see photos or videos from the global South. Issues that happen in the global South sometimes go under the carpet. Earlier this year, I was doing a research for a project, and I saw a man mourning very bitterly of his dead child who had been killed due to a flood. It was heart-wrenching. It fueled my resolve to continue my climate storytelling project. A lot of those stories are not being amplified because it's not happening in the global north, and unfortunately, these are the harsh realities. So one of the reasons why I feel, so to solve this problem, I am trying my very best with a group of young Africans across the continent to upskill young Africans with the climate storytelling skills they need to start telling their stories themselves. Social media is a very important leveler, giving us access to the world from our hands, right? So, from the tips of our fingers. So I am trying to see how I can work with young people to give them the skills from photography to video to public speaking, to even having the clarity to communicate their story, right? Communicating the injustice and inspiration, and not just that, spark action after their story. It doesn't just end at the story, but it also goes into action. So I think one of the ways banks can also support is by helping in climate storytelling, right? How are you helping to amplify climate storytelling from both perspectives? And finally, I would say empathy. I would encourage each stakeholder, each generation, each party coming into this space to have more empathy towards the other generation, understand, trying to put themselves in the shoes of the other party or generation to really see things through the lens of perhaps young people.
Thank you. I absolutely agree that storytelling is so important. If you're going to get action to happen in a democracy, you have to have people understanding the issues, and there's no substitute for storytelling there. And your point on social media is really interesting. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of attention, and quite justified attention, on the negative effects of social media, and a lot of us in the, the legacy mainstream media can be quite skeptical of social media. But you make a really important point that it is opening new opportunities for young people in particular to get their message across and tell stories in different ways. So that's really important to remember.